On the 18th of November 1978, members of the Guyanese police force and the US military ventured into the dense rainforest of northern Guyana. Their target was a man named Jim Jones, the leader of an American cult that had settled into the region 4 years earlier. He and his followers had carved out a massive section in the middle of this forest and turned it into a complete compound called Jonestown. The only way to reach this town was to trek through dense vegetation, 100-foot-tall trees, and muddy ground. That said, the true danger of the mission was beyond the trek. Jim was likely already aware of the mission to apprehend him, so there would be a good chance that this group of police officers and military personnel would be welcomed by a small militia that was armed to the gills. However, when the group reached Jonestown, it was eerily quiet, and as they stepped through its entrance, they came across a scene that could only be described as hell on earth. The entire town was empty, except for the central pavilion, which was surrounded by the remains of hundreds of people, including many children. The total number of victims was calculated to be around 900, making it the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate incident up until that point in history. And while this was initially considered an open and shut case of a mass suicide, the reality was far more horrific than anyone could have imagined. Jim Jones' cult originally started as a church in the US, but as it became more popular, it started garnering criticism from the media and the government for Jim's support of communism in places like Soviet Russia. So in 1974, he moved deep into the rainforests of Guyana to escape the scrutiny, and a large number of his most loyal followers went with him. He presented this new location as a self-sustained paradise where he and his followers could live a life of peace and serenity.
These are potato chips made from plantain, and they're more delicious. They're a combination of a potato chip and a french fry. And radishes, You don't know what you're missing down here. They make their own buns and hamburgers and the leafy green vegetables. By the way, we just won first prize from the national government of Guyana for our leafy green vegetables. Here are the people at the table eating an afternoon snack. You see Pepsi-Colas here for 3 cents, American money. That sounds appetizing, doesn't it? I can't get anybody to go home with me.
When in reality, life in Jonestown was anything but peaceful. Members were required to work 12 hours every day for 6 days a week, and there was nothing they could do to escape these torturous conditions. Jim had already reached an agreement with the Guyanese government to make getting a visa back to the US almost impossible. On top of that, the whole compound was surrounded by a fence, with armed guards patrolling outside to catch anyone trying to escape. But as time went on, relatives of the cult members still living in the US began urging the government to bring their loved ones back home. So in November of 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan and 17 other people, including members of the media, visited Guyana to investigate Jonestown. They reached the headquarters on November 17th and began their operation, looking around, talking to people, anything they could do to learn the truth about Jonestown. Surprisingly, things looked just as carefree and jovial as Jim had portrayed in his promotional videos. Of course, it later came out that Jim had actually run rehearsals on how to convince Leo's delegation that everyone was happy and in good spirits. But even then, the truth didn't stay hidden for long. That night, 2 members, Vernon and Monica, secretly passed an ominous note to the delegation that read, "Dear Congressmen, Vernon Gosney and Monica Bagby, please help us get out of Jonestown." This prompted the delegation members to ask others if they wanted to leave as well, and 9 more cult members found the courage to come forward. This even included one of Jim's closest men, shedding light on just how bad the living conditions in Jonestown truly were. The next morning, Leo's group took these members to the nearby Kaituma airstrip so they could return home. But just as they were boarding the planes, Jim's henchmen pulled up in front of the plane in a truck and opened fire, killing 4 people, including Congressman Leo Ryan. Back at Jonestown, Jim gathered the members at the central pavilion and told them to drink the poisoned grape flavor aid. In his words, this was the only way to escape the American government.
We can't go back. They won't leave us alone. They're now going back to tell more lies, which means more congressmen, and there's no way we can survive.
In the end, while many brainwashed cult members agreed with Jim and drank the poison juice willingly, others, including children, were forced to drink it at gunpoint. Some were even injected with cyanide or shot outright. The American military was on its way to Jonestown as soon as it became aware of the shooting at the airstrip. Unfortunately, by the time they got there, it was already too late. The sheer scale of the tragedy, combined with the fact that many of the victims were forced into it, turned it into the most haunting sight those soldiers or anyone has ever found in a forest. On April 4th, 1922, a mechanic named Albert Hofner visited the Gruber house located near a forest in Weidhofen, Germany. The family had hired him to repair their barn motor a few weeks earlier. However, when he reached the house, he noticed something strange. The cows and dogs were making a lot of noise in the barn, yet the rest of the house was completely silent. He tried knocking and calling out to them many times, but no one came to the door either. Assuming they weren't home, he waited in their yard for an hour before deciding to leave. But just as he was about to leave, he noticed that the door to the motorroom was unlocked. So he decided to repair the motor anyway and come back for his payment later. After finishing the repairs, Albert wanted to inform one of their neighbors about his work, but the home was completely isolated, with the closest neighbor over half a kilometer away. With no other option, he made the detour and knocked on the door of Lorenz Schlittenbauer, Gruber's closest neighbor. Lorenz, however, found the empty house extremely suspicious. He knew the family well and figured they would have informed him if they were going somewhere. So later that evening, he joined two of his neighbors to go check things out for themselves. Sure enough, the house was just as empty as Albert had reported. As they were looking around the house, one of them noticed that the door to the machine area was also unlocked. The three entered through this door. After examining the machine room, they decided to check further by breaking open the barn door connected to it. However, the horrific sight they witnessed on the other side of the door likely stayed with them for the rest of their lives. At first, things looked normal, but then one of them spotted what looked like a human foot sticking out from a pile of hay. This turned out to be the remains of 72-year-old Kazilia, the head lady of the house. As they got closer, they also noticed 3 more bodies scattered throughout the barn. These included the head of the house, 63-year-old Andreas Gruber, and his 2 daughters. Things became even more gruesome. They also discovered the remains of Andreas's 2-year-old grandson Josef in his stroller, with his skull crushed in, as well as the family maid Maria in a different room. Someone had murdered the entire Gruber family and left without getting caught. Later investigation concluded that the family was killed 4 days earlier on the 1st of April, but what made this already horrific crime even more chilling was that it was carried out over the course of several hours. The killer likely spent a long time in the house afterward, trying to hide the evidence by covering it with hay and blankets. The room with the maid even had clothes stuffed into its windowsill to make spotting her from outside more difficult. Most assumed this was the result of a robbery gone wrong. However, most valuables were still in the house, which complicated the case even further. Neighbors reported that the family had seen men staring at their home from the woods on multiple occasions. Their previous maid had quit months earlier, claiming the house was haunted, and someone had broken into the machine room a few days before the killings. None of these clues helped investigators find the killer, and since the home was so isolated, there were no witnesses. To this day, the Gruber family murders remain an unsolved mystery. In July 2015, Mark Andre was marking trees in the dense Arcata community forest in California. He worked as Arcata's environmental services director and was doing a routine inspection when something strange caught his attention. Just off the hiking trail, Mark noticed an unusual structure poking through the vegetation. He got closer and was shocked to find a cabin in the middle of the forest. What made this discovery even more strange was the fact that this wasn't a hastily built shack. It was surprisingly well constructed, with a stable cinder block base, plastic sheets to keep things dry, and even a lock on the front door. Someone had clearly spent weeks, if not months, building it from scratch. Mark immediately notified the park rangers, who spent the next few days staking out near the cabin to see if the owner would return. They eventually broke the lock to see if they could find any clues about who lived there, but this only left them even more confused. Inside, they found everything someone would need to survive in the middle of nowhere: fresh water, a wood-burning stove, canned food, and even books stacked neatly on the shelves. It looked more like a cramped studio apartment than a makeshift cabin, yet none of the items inside provided any clues about the owner's identity. Since no one had returned after several days, rangers assumed the cabin had been abandoned. They followed proper procedures and left an eviction notice on the front door before leaving the site. But when Mark and the Rangers returned to demolish it, they made an even more shocking discovery. The entire cabin had vanished without a trace. There wasn't even a single nail left behind. In its place was the international symbol of squatter drawn in charcoal. This raised more questions than it answered. How did the cabin's residents always manage to be away whenever the Rangers visited? And more importantly, why were they hiding in the middle of a forest in the first place? It's possible this person was a criminal on the run, but even after a decade, no one knows the real answer. In May 2016, a hiker was walking through a forest in Harlan, Kentucky. About halfway through his trip, he discovered a trail camera lying on the forest floor. Trail cameras are typically used to capture wildlife footage, but this particular camera didn't have any storage or battery. Assuming it was abandoned, the hiker took it home and gave it to a friend to see if it could be fixed. What neither of them knew was that this camera was actually a trap set by a madman. As soon as the friend connected a battery to it, the camera exploded. The blast was powerful enough to blow off some of the man's fingers and injure his stomach. The device had been rigged to explode the moment it received power. After being alerted to the incident, authorities swept the area where the camera was found and discovered another trail camera with similar modifications, but it didn't contain anything that could help identify who placed it there. While canvassing local neighborhoods, investigators finally caught a break. 2 different people reported hearing an explosion at a neighbor's house several months earlier. That neighbor was 39-year-old Mark Sawaf. When authorities searched his home, they found buckets filled with bomb-making materials and a handwritten note that read, "Broken camera for a broken soul." He was arrested on June 21st, 2016, but before he could be officially charged, the police wanted his help locating other explosive cameras he may have left behind. During this trip, Sawaf tried to grab an officer's gun, likely in an attempt to escape. In the struggle, he was accidentally shot and killed. Before his death, he helped the police find 12 more rigged cameras hidden throughout the Harlan forest, but it's entirely possible that many others are still out there, waiting to be discovered by an unsuspecting passerby. On November 10th, 1985, a hunter was walking through the dense woods of Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. He'd used this route many times before, but this time, something unusual caught his eye. Hidden beneath a pile of leaves and debris was a rusted 55-gallon metal drum. Curious, he walked closer, only to discover the chopped-up remains of 2 people inside. Authorities were alerted immediately. Later investigation revealed the victims were a young woman and a young girl. Both had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head, then cut into pieces and stuffed into the barrel. Sadly, both bodies were too disfigured to identify. With no leads, the case went cold until the year 2000. A state trooper was revisiting the area where the first barrel was found, hoping to uncover new clues. But instead, he came across something far worse. Another identical 55-gallon barrel, just 150 yards from the first one. Inside were the remains of 2 more young girls, both between 1 and 4 years old. They had been killed in the same brutal fashion, blunt force trauma, then dismembered. The discovery confirmed that all 4 murders were the work of the same person, but even with this new evidence, the case remained unsolved for another 14 years. Finally, thanks to advanced DNA testing, 3 of the 4 victims were identified. The adult woman was 24-year-old Marlice Elizabeth Honeychurch. The 2 children were her daughters, 7-year-old Mary Vaughn and 11-month-old Sarah McWaters. This identification helped narrow the investigation, but didn't immediately reveal the killer. Eventually, DNA tests pointed to a man named Terry Petter Rasmussen.
And you're not a doctor. And both stories have their footings.
Maybe she hurt herself, and you're concerned about that getting out, that she's harmed herself.
No. If you're thinking, is she suicidal? Yes.
Unbeknownst to the authorities at the time, Rasmussen had already been arrested for the 2002 murder of his wife. He was sentenced to life in prison and died in 2010, long before anyone linked him to the Bear Brook murders. Although the case is technically solved, many questions remain unanswered, and with the killer no longer alive to face justice, the story remains one of the most disturbing and unresolved tragedies ever uncovered in a forest. a man walking his dog near Ashford, Washington, made one of the most disturbing discoveries in Red Elm Woods, an isolated forest known for its lack of maintained trails and almost no cell service. He had taken a rarely used fire road about 2 miles in when his dog began growling at a thick patch of underbrush just off the path. There was a strong, rotten smell in the air, bad enough that he initially assumed it was a dead animal. When he went to investigate, he found a shallow pit, roughly 5 feet across. Inside were 6 large bundles wrapped in black plastic sheeting and duct tape. Heavy river stones had been placed on top of each one as if to weigh them down. One of the bundles had a tear near a corner, and through it, he saw a human hand. He backed out immediately and contacted the local sheriff's office. A forensic team was sent in the next day. What they uncovered was grim. 6 wrapped packages, each containing partial human remains. In total, investigators identified parts from at least 4 different victims, all dismembered and sealed in layers of plastic and tape. The victims had been killed in different ways. One had severe head trauma, another had signs of strangulation, and one had been partially burned. The remains were in various stages of decomposition. According to the medical examiner, the bodies hadn't all been dumped at once. The site had been used over a span of several years, with new remains added slowly over time. One victim was linked to a missing persons report from 2003. Another had never been reported missing at all and still remains unidentified. The location was less than 30 feet from a trail, one that occasional hikers still used. Despite the remains being found in a methodical burial site, no suspects were ever arrested. No fingerprints, no DNA matches beyond the victims, and no witnesses. To this day, the identity of whoever created the pit is still unknown. In October of 1991, a man walking along a rural lane near Bolney, England, made a discovery that still haunts investigators. Hidden in the underground, wrapped tightly in a piece of carpet, was a human torso. The head and both hands were missing. The arms had been cut cleanly just below the elbows, likely to remove identifying tattoos. Forensic analysis determined the victim was a physically fit man between 30 and 45 years old, likely of Southern German origin. There was no match to any missing persons report in the UK. The precision of the dismemberment suggested that the killer knew exactly what they were doing. Whoever they were, they had taken deliberate steps to erase this man's identity. Investigators launched Operation A23, a massive task force involving 60 officers and more than €150,000 in resources. They even searched a nearby abandoned rental house, which was once occupied by a man using a German alias. Inside was a strange clue, an adult magazine with numbers written inside, but no direct link to the murder was ever found. Over 3 decades later, the victim remains unidentified and the killer never caught. All that's left of the case is a name given by the media, the Bolney Torso.